as a Catholic intellectual and as a theologian, I have had to wrestle with aspects of the Catholic tradition. My own background in this kind of justice and peace milieu or world brings me to address, not just in practical terms, but in scholarly theological ways, various differences that at times turn into division and then polarization. And so as the Pope, of course, he's going to have to navigate that not only within the flock, that is with respect to Catholics, but also outside of the Catholic Church. In that other role as a global leader, his message is in continuity with Pope Francis, who called for the church to become synodal, that is a listening church. And so in that sense, if he continues down that path, then this path of synodality requires that we listen to the concrete conditions of human beings, that we also listen to diverse perspectives.
Making Peace Visible is a small 501c3 nonprofit organization based in Somerville, Massachusetts. What we do is unique, consistently analyzing how the media covers conflict and amplifying stories of resolution and reconciliation that are often ignored by the mainstream media. In the month of July, we're working to raise $40,000 to continue and grow this work. With your help, we can fund journalists producing rigorous, underreported stories of conflict transformation through the Making Peace Visible Story Awards and convene strategic gatherings of peace builders and journalists to shift how stories get told. Your donation also keeps this podcast going and helps us reach more listeners. Make a one-time or recurring gift at makingpeacevisible.org, and thanks. On Monday, May 12, 2025, the newly ordained Pope Leo XIV made an important address to over 1,000 journalists gathered at the Vatican. What he said was especially moving to us at Making Peace Visible, and I hope to the journalists he addressed. It was the first time we ever heard someone with his stature and authority put the responsibility on journalists directly in saying, quote, "Let us disarm communications of all prejudice and resentment, fanaticism and even hatred. Let us free it from aggression. Let us disarm words, and we will help to disarm the world." Hearing the new Pope talk about the role of journalism in this way was music to our ears, because it's such an important message, and of course it underlines everything that we do at MPV. In today's interview, we'll be talking to two amazing individuals who can help us illuminate these ideas, the relationships between peace, conflict, religion, and journalism. We'll be talking to Miguel Díaz, former U.S. ambassador to the Vatican during the Obama administration. Miguel has worked with both Pope Leo and with Pope Francis on a number of initiatives. We'll also be talking to Liz Hume, Executive Director of the Alliance for Peacebuilding, the Center for Global Peacebuilding Organizations. I'm grateful to you both for joining us today to explore these ideas. You know, in a time when support from governments for peacebuilding initiatives has diminished dramatically, and multilateral organizations like the UN have been weakened, the Pope's address to journalists offers an opportunity to think about how institutions like the Catholic Church and the papacy can play a productive role in peacebuilding. Liz, I'd like to start with you to set the scene for us, so to speak. What's the state of the peacebuilding field now, in your estimation?
To say that it is challenging times is understating what's happening. We have hit record-breaking violent global conflict, and that was even before Ukraine and Gaza and Sudan. At the same time, military expenditures are increasing, and we're not saying you don't need security and military, but when you're seeing an increase of security, military expenditures, and a decrease also of peace building and conflict prevention, and this, increasingly global violent conflict, well, what we're doing, is it working? And so, it is easy to get mired down in these really horrible stats, or you can also look where there's opportunities. So that's why this is so exciting. Faith leaders are so critical to conflict prevention and peace building. Huge. In many places, They are the moral authority. Faith leaders are who people look to. Whether they're, listening to what they have to say on a daily basis or they're going to some religious service, they can be critical in reducing and preventing violent conflict. Catholic relief services, Catholic Charities works here in the United States on conflict prevention and peace building. Catholic Relief Services works all over the world, and they're a really critical member of the Alliance for Peace Building. So there's so much opportunity there, and there's a lot of excitement there.
Miguel, what influence has the Vatican had historically on geopolitics and on peace?
The Vatican has had a huge influence on geopolitics and peace. The Vatican, or the Holy See to be more precise, has been engaged in diplomatic activities since the 5th century in one way, shape, or another. And of course, in the modern period, it takes off dramatically in terms of, having over 184, diplomatic relations, with states. It might seem like a small city state, and it might seem like an organization that as a religious organization that may not have much of an impact upon world affairs. But in fact, history shows that it has been involved consistently and effectively in addressing various conflicts. As a sitting ambassador, I used to say that it's not my expression; it's borrowed from previous ambassadors and from previous observers that the church has eyes and ears everywhere. And so when we think also of the many ways that both papal teaching and papal messages enforce the message of peace and reinforce it, and then that gets spread out through the papal nuncios, the Pope's ambassadors at the different capitals of the world, I think that's significant. The other thing is, many of us, I'm Cuban American, and certainly while I was not old enough to even begin to think about the crisis, right? The Caribbean Missile Crisis brought the world to the verge of global conflict. And right after that, Pope John the 23rd issued a very prominent, and which is still read certainly by not just Catholics but by others. He issued the encyclical, and the encyclical is a teaching, the papal teaching called Pacem in Terris, right? Peace on earth, in which again he underscored there the need for global interdependence, the need for human solidarity, among other things. But also, I think it's important to state that the Vatican oftentimes walks the talk, right? Because the Vatican has been involved in negotiations that have brought parties together. I think a lot of us were moved to see, the picture of Zelensky with Trump, right, at the Vatican, recently. We've also been moved to see the current Pope offer himself as a bridge builder in terms of conflict in the Middle East and other parts around the world. So, but yes, in the Middle East, in the Balkans, in Africa, in Latin America, in Europe, we clearly have seen the role of the Vatican as a significant role in advocating for conflict resolution.
That's great. Now, I understand to bring it down to a different level, you've known Pope Leo, formerly Robert Prevost, for some years. What's your relationship been like?
Well, okay, so in theory for some years, in practice since last August, 4 of us from Loyola University of Chicago, 4 professors, had dinner with him. So I have known now from a professional perspective 2 other popes. Pope Benedict, I served under President Barack Obama during his papacy. And then Pope Francis, because of what I'm about, to relate. Loyola University of Chicago back in 2022 began this initiative called the Building Bridges Project. We began with this initiative with Dr. Emi Sekuda, who is the secretary for the Pontifical Commission of Latin America. And she's one of the highest ranking women at the Vatican. Cardinal Prevost was basically named as the president of that commission. And so basically he was her boss. And this initiative it's with university students, it's still ongoing, that attempts to listen to the university students as they address the salient challenges of our time. And it was an initiative that Pope Francis spearheaded. And so we would bring these students from around the world in conversation with Pope Francis and the 4 of us. And so flash forward to last year, after Pope Francis brings Cardinal Prevost over to the Vatican. And Misa reaches out to us and says, hey, Cardinal Prevost is going to be in town, in your town. I'd like you to meet with him because he already knows about this initiative. And so that's what prompted this very personal meeting, familial personal meeting at a local restaurant in Chicago. We had a great opportunity to interact with then Cardinal Prevost, now Pope Leo, on a very personal, but also to get a sense of the human being and to get a sense of some of his passions and interests, both in terms of theology as well as global affairs. And so we had a little bit of an insight there. So on May 3rd, 5 days before the conclave, I sent a text to Dr. Emil Secula, the Secretary Emil Secula, over at the Vatican. And I just said, wouldn't it be great for all of us working on peace building, on this Building Bridges project with students and young persons from around the world, said, wouldn't it be great for all of us if he, meaning Cardinal Robert Francis Prevost, was elected in the conclave as the next pope? That tweet occurred on May 3rd.
Wow.
And so on May 8th, we know why when he emerges from the conclave, I was like,
exactly.
This is insane.
It's a wish come true. But getting back to where this conversation began, what's your reflection of Pope Leo's first address to journalists? Is it unusual for a pope to appeal directly to the news media to become, in a sense, an instrument of peace?
In many ways, he is following the footsteps of Pope Francis, right? I think it's important also to think about what's in a name. He takes the name of Pope Leo the 14th, and I think that's important because, and he explicitly states that he's, taking the name because of Pope Leo XIII, who is known as the social pope, the pope of workers. Pope Leo XIII begins his tradition in Roman Catholicism, Catholic social teaching. And at the center of Catholic social teaching is really justice and peace, right? These are the central themes, beyond, of course, affirming the dignity of all human persons, the solidarity and of the human family, etc. But what I find most insightful beyond the speech that you have just cited is the fact that when he goes out in the balcony, after he's, vested as a new pontiff, and he goes out into the Vatican, in Vatican City, his very first words are, "Peace be with you." And in that speech, the word peace, he uses the word peace no less than 10 times, and also uses the words bridge building and calling upon the human family to be bridge builders amongst each other and amongst the nations. And then in that speech, I think he issues one of the most powerful statements, in terms of the whole speech, but certainly in terms of what he has said so far, because he says that he calls for a peace that is unarmed and disarming, humble, and persevering. The fact that he has made it a point that he's going to be in continuity with Pope Francis, the fact that Francis took the name Francis because of St. Francis of Assisi, who is widely known for his work on reconciliation, peace building, interreligious dialogue, care of creation. He is aligning himself with that tradition very explicitly, with the dimension that peace also requires justice, right? So yeah, before the conclave, I think there were lots of conversations and there were lots of talks behind the scenes that he would become the second pope from the Americas, but also have this kind of bridge building capacity in terms of the North and South.
Well, as you said, he is following on Pope Francis in a lot of ways. And Pope Francis recognized that journalism plays a critical role in our understanding of how the world operates. He chose Nobel Peace Prize laureate journalist Maria Ressa to be the lead speaker to address a major Vatican conference focused on a wide range of social, environmental, and economic problems. And she began her address telling the audience that social media rewards lies, and that lies travel faster than the truth over the internet. Her words about the impacts of social media were crystal clear, and you'll forgive me for reading this whole quote, but I thought it was perfect, given the context. Devil and angel, what social media did was kick the angel off your shoulder, grow the devil, and give it a direct line into your nervous system. Big tech transforms social media from a tool of connection into a weapon of mass behavioral engineering. These platforms are not neutral technologies. They're sophisticated systems designed to exploit our deepest psychological vulnerabilities. They monetize our outrage, hate, amplify our divisions, and systematically erode our capacity for nuanced thinking, our capacity for empathy. I just love that.
That quote speaks also to the fact that Pope Leo has already, stated that he has invited us that we have to continue to think about in a critical way the role of artificial intelligence, for instance, in the ways that anthropologically we are being transformed. I know this from my classroom experience in terms of the ability of students to engage text, right, or their attention span, right? And so, as bridge builders, as leaders, world leaders, as national leaders, as, religious leaders, whatever it is, in whatever form of communication and interaction we are involved, we have to understand that the makeup of the human being is changing, has changed, and will continue to change. It's always done that. But we have to understand factors that have changed and continue to change our humanity and capacity to communicate and receive communication. So,
does Robert Prevost, now Pope Leo, have a history or a reputation as a peace broker within the Catholic Church?
Well, certainly the Pope grows up in Chicago. The Pope studies at Catholic Theological Union in Chicago, which is basically a place, for anybody that is acquainted with Catholic Theological Union, it's a place that welcomes the global church, right? It's a place that had the women, after the Second Vatican Council in the Catholic Church in the 1960s, he had these intellectuals, they had these cutting-edge biblical scholars and theologians. And so this is kind of like the context, a city of immigrants, a city of diverse peoples, a school with diverse thought, whose professors and student body comes from the world, right? These are the elements that shape this human being. And so, context is decisive, is important for all of us, right? It shapes our way of being and thinking. So it's not, for me, surprising that his first words when he comes out in the balcony and then the message is so focused on bridge building and peace building, because I think that his heart is definitely, reading the signs of our times, to use Catholic expression from the Second Vatican Council, to read what is happening and to respond to those signs. And he knows that we are in a difficult moment with lots of polarization, lots of divisions at the local, national, and international level, and that we need faith-based diplomacy as well as all other forms of diplomacy to succeed at defeating this kind of forces that are suffocating our better angels.
But it's going to be important because I agree with you 100%, Miguel. Look at, the best indicator of how somebody acts is how, in the future is how they've acted in the past. Those are the questions I asked Miguel. So what has he done in the past? What has he said? What is he saying now? And that is all great. But, it's really important to, talk the talk, but you got to also walk the walk. And that's why it's also important for us to be very clear and talk about these issues. And if you have to nudge people to do the right thing, sometimes you have to nudge them into that, or explain the issues and, how to be practical and solve these problems. And I think one way that the Catholic Church can really be instrumental is on the nuclear threat. We've kind of thought that was all gone. And we're seeing now that the nuclear threat has, come back full steam.
That's why I wouldn't be surprised if he, among his first encyclicals, if he writes something on peace and he goes back to Pacem in Terris and the, Cuban Missile Crisis and the nuclear threats there, and then retrieves that moment yet again. But I just think that, and that's why I was trying to, to make reference to the kind of the Italian, the French, and the Spanish background, and the education and all that, because I don't know, from personal experience, I just think that at times too, we tend to have this myopic, right, mentality, because we haven't exposed ourselves at the personal, relational level to other peoples, to other perspectives, to other worldviews, right? He is from the United States, but he spent so much time in Peru with the poor, right? In a different part of the continent.
And at a very important time.
At a very important time. And so that's why I think that, he has lived in both North, South, and in places where violence was part of his everyday realities.
He's had a very rich background, very, very rich. Liz, something you and I have profound in common is our interest in communicating the need for peace building. So, something we both are passionate about. And so much information sharing about what's going on in the world is happening via social media. Religious organizations don't exactly have a reputation for being tech savvy, but what do you think they can do to reach more young people with a message about peace?
I was just going to say, I'm not a social media influencer, but I wish I was. So maybe on conflict prevention and peace building. And that's probably what we need more. So you got to use the tools that we have. I don't know. Should we get the Pope on TikTok? I mean, it's, if we want to reach the youth, we have to be more, and we have to do it too, the peace building field. I mean, we're old and wonky a lot of times.
Exactly.
And with very short and, concrete, practical things that people can do. I think that's where we miss. When we talk about peace building and conflict prevention, it's very theoretical. So we have to break it down in very also simple and practical terms, what people can do. In Northern Ireland recently, there was major conflict that was happening because of social media on alleged sexual assault by supposedly immigrants. And, we all have to get better at intervening and figuring out how to also do a bit of surge capacity in those moments.
Yes.
And I think that's really important.
Yeah.
I think there was some, profound level of awareness in my interactions with Pope Francis, Building Bridges project that mainly engages the youth. And we've done it in different continents. It was precisely that, the Pope was sitting down with young people and we were having these recorded Zoom conversations that would then be posted. And you can see them all in our website at Loyola University of Chicago. But there was an awareness that, okay, we try out some new recipes here. And the youth need to be engaged as agents rather than just as, okay, well, we come to the youth at the last moment. They need to take a more active role in terms of the present and the future of our human family. And certainly that's the case in terms of peace building, that we need to engage them more in terms of, in our universities, where we've seen also that at our various universities, violence erupts. We need to work better at engaging the youth, but also at communicating in ways that they are more accustomed and using also their expertise to also promote, the bridge building efforts.
Yeah. And then looking at it, the contemporary situation, there are political divisions within the Catholic Church, and some prominent conservative members of the American right, like J.D. Vance and Candace Owens, converted to Catholicism before the last presidential election. They see it as a religion that promotes traditional family values. Then you have Catholics on the other side of the spectrum who are pushing for progressive reforms within the church, like recognition of same-sex marriage and acceptance of abortion. What do you see as Pope Leo's role in that divide?
I can say that even though I'm not in his shoes, as a Catholic intellectual and as a theologian, I have had to navigate this issue. I have had to wrestle with aspects of the Catholic tradition. My own background in this kind of justice and peace milieu or world brings me to address, not just in practical terms, but in scholarly theological ways, various differences that at times differences turn into division and then polarization, right? I teach queer studies, I teach liberation thought, I teach peace and justice. And in the classroom, I have, students who come from those different fields, areas, perspectives. And so as the Pope, of course, he's going to have to navigate that not only within the flock, that is with respect to Catholics, but also outside of the Catholic Church. But again, in that other role as a global leader, he is called also to engage, and he has already, in that kind of messaging initial messaging that he's given us, his message is in continuity with Pope Francis, who called for the church to become synodal, that is a listening church. And so in that sense, if he continues down that path, then this path of synodality requires that we listen to the concrete conditions of human beings, that we also listen to diverse perspectives. And in that listening and in our efforts, try to reconcile and try to wrestle in constructive ways. And at the end of the day, we may not agree, but we don't have to turn those differences into division and into violence. We can, in some ways, agree to disagree, and we can understand or begin to understand why perhaps some of us, have different perspectives on X, Y, and Z, because our humanities have been shaped by different experiences, because we are embodied in different ways with respect to gender, race, sexual orientation, cultural, geographical location. And I'm speaking here as an educator, but I think that what we need to do is precisely to not be so situational and closed off to others, but to open our hearts and our minds to be able to see that the landscape can be seen, perceived, and interpreted from different angles, which is what I always do with my students. I walk around the classroom and say, look, I'm seeing a different part of you that I was not seeing 5 minutes ago. But that's because I have changed in an embodied way, I have changed perspective. And that enables me to see you now in a different light, in a different way.
That's the challenge of so much in, modern life, is learning to walk in the shoes of the other.
Absolutely.
And, how can we push today, tomorrow, in the future, so that the Catholic Church becomes or continues to be a leading voice on peace building, conflict prevention, and works against serious crises?
I don't think we're going to have to push him much in that direction, right? I just returned from from a trip from Europe, and I attended Mass on the Feast of the Holy Spirit in the Catholic Church Pentecost. I was honored to attend Mass when he presided, and also had a number of conversations with people there. And I know that when it comes to what's in his heart and mind, there is no question that this theme of peace and bridge building is central, and it's likely to be central to his papacy. So I don't think we'll have to do much pushing there and encouragement. What I do think is that a lot of the organizations, faith-based diplomacy, organizations that engage in faith-based diplomacy, and organizations within and outside the Catholic Church that have been really excited about, that have been committed to, and have been passionate about the work of peace building, I think that they just got their reinforcement. I hope that's the case, but I think it's going to be the case.
Yeah, no, he looks like an advocate. He really does.
That seems to be, whereas Francis Laudato Si, right, care of the environment, was really, really central. I'm not saying that Pope Leo is going to abandon that, but it's clear that, peace and justice are going to be central to his papacy. And I think that those of us that do work, whether within the United States, outside the United States, globally, nationally, locally, as peace builders, are going to find the kinds of support that, institutionally speaking.
And he says that. And he says that institutions matter as the time when institutions are being dismantled. But also, I think a really key piece of Pope Leo is, and this is how we kind of, let's say, since World War II, we focused on conflict over there and not conflict here at home, or violence here at home. And what I think is really exceptional about this new Pope is that, Chicago is a great town, but it also has significant violence and,
Yes.
significant inequality. And so he has also that experience of understanding that in the global north. So it's not just all about conflict over there and things that have to get fixed over
Absolutely.
there. It's here too.
Right. No, and I think that that's why it's a very interesting choice for our times. Perhaps none of us expected that during a lifetime there would be a Pope from North America. I liked it, but he really has that foot on each side of the continent in terms of the north and the south and the central side. So thank you for bringing that out, Liz, because that's part of that context, right? That has shaped him. It's what gives me hope also that he will not romanticize. He will listen, and he will then decide in a way that is wise.
Well, I can't thank you both enough for joining me in this really interesting conversation about what I think is an important development. And, the fact that he comes from America at a time when America is in so much trouble. I'm hoping we'll have a positive impact on the troubles that we are facing.
I've said, right after he was elected and I was interviewed, I've said it in a couple of things. To me, because he's from the Americas, but particularly because also he is one of us here from the United States, he really gives us a different message. He switches the message from America first to America cares. And I think that is so significant. We need caring so much.
We really do.
We need it so much. So, because we need to humanize ourselves and the other rather than to demonize ourselves and others. So
there's way too much demonization going on, and it's having a terrible impact on our politics, on everything, really. You two are terrific. It was wonderful to talk to you, and such a neat opportunity to think about this particular moment in our history. So thank you very much. It was really a pleasure.
Always a pleasure.
Pleasure's ours.
You can learn more about Pope Leo XIV's background as a bridge builder at the links in the show notes. Also in the show notes, you'll find a link to the New York Times article about the new Pope's address to journalists, along with a full transcript of his speech. There's also more information about our two guests. Making Peace Visible is produced by Andrew Maraskin. The associate producer is Faith McClure, and I'm Jamil Simon. Please help us raise $40,000 this July. Just go to makingpeacevisible.org/donate. And if a donation isn't an option, you can still support the show. Leave a rating or review on Apple Podcasts or a rating and a comment on Spotify. It really helps other people find the show, and we love reading them. Thanks so much for listening, and talk soon.